I never imagined that a simple winter hike would turn into one of the most disturbing experiences of my life. My name is Jack, and this is the story of a day the mountains taught me that not all silence is peace. On a freezing January morning, my friend Mike and I ventured to climb Mount Granite, one of the tallest peaks in the region. Despite being experienced hikers, there was something different about that day. The air was thick, imbued with an indefinable sense of expectation. We started our journey early, with the first rays of sunlight barely penetrating the dense fog enveloping the mountain's base. The crunch of snow under our boots was the only sound breaking the sepulchral silence of the forest. Mike, ever the optimist, commented on the wild beauty of the place, but I couldn't shake a growing unease. As we gained altitude, the landscape transformed. The trees became sparser, and the wind picked up, howling between the rocks like a wounded animal. We stopped for a quick snack, and that's when I noticed something strange: marks in the snow that didn't seem to have been made by animals or other hikers. "Mike, are you seeing this?" I asked, pointing to the marks. He shrugged, suggesting they were probably tracks made by some mountain animal. I tried to convince myself that they were just animal tracks, but a persistent restlessness continued to torment me. We decided to press on. After all, scary stories were just that, stories. We reached the summit of Mount Granite as the sun began to set, painting the sky with hues of orange and red that looked like spilled blood on the clouds. We quickly set up our tent, mindful of the biting cold that intensified with the approaching night. As we prepared our meal, I couldn't help but notice the oppressive silence that enveloped us. Even the wind dared not disturb this supernatural quietude. "It's as if the mountain is holding its breath," I murmured to Mike, who looked at me with a raised eyebrow. "Relax, Jack," he replied, laughing nervously. "It's just the nerves from the altitude. Tomorrow we'll be back to civilization with another hiking story to tell." I tried to convince myself that he was right, but the weight of that silence seemed to crush my chest. I lay down in my sleeping bag, listening to Mike's steady breathing as he fell asleep almost instantly. On the other hand, I lay awake for hours, my eyes fixed on the tent ceiling, imagining what could be lurking outside in the darkness. At some point in the wee hours of the morning, I was awakened by a sound. It wasn't loud, but in that absolute silence, it seemed deafening. It was as if someone or something was dragging something heavy through the snow, circling our tent. My heart raced, and I wanted to scream, "Wake Mike," do anything but remain paralyzed with fear. But my body wouldn't respond. The sound continued for a few minutes that felt like an eternity. Then, as abruptly as it had started, it stopped. The silence returned, heavier and more menacing than ever. I spent the rest of the night in an anguished state of vigilance, awaiting the dawn like a castaway awaiting rescue. Dawn arrived with agonizing slowness, bringing with it a thin layer of fresh snow. Mike woke up energized, seemingly oblivious to my night of terror. As we broke camp, I struggled against the urge to tell him about the nocturnal sounds, fearing I would sound crazy or cowardly. We began our descent in silence, the newly fallen snow muffling our footsteps. At first, the hike seemed normal, almost comforting in its monotony. But then, about 1.5 miles below the peak, something made me stop abruptly. There, in the virgin snow next to the trail, was my full name, Jack Harrison, written in large, clear letters. My blood ran cold. "Mike," I called out with a trembling voice. "Did you do this?" Mike looked at the inscription, his face paling. "Dude, I wouldn't pull a stunt like that. You know I don't even know your last name." Paralyzed, we stared at those letters that shouldn't have existed. The fresh snow from the previous night would have erased any old marks, and as far as we knew, we were alone on the mountain. "Let's get out of here," Mike whispered, his voice slightly shaking. I needed no further encouragement. We started down the trail at a frantic pace, stumbling and slipping in the snow, driven by mounting fear. At every bend in the trail, I expected to see someone or something watching us. The trees seemed to close in on us, their bony branches reaching out as if to grab us. The wind whispered through the rocks, and I could have sworn I heard my name being called. We reached the parking lot breathless and trembling, our desperate run through the trail leaving us exhausted and shaken. Mike's car had never seemed so welcoming. But before we left, I knew I had one last thing to do: sign the logbook at the trail's base. With my hands still shaking, I walked to the small cabin that housed the book. Mike stayed behind, eager to leave, but I insisted. It was a safety precaution after all. If something happened, someone would know we'd been there. I opened the heavy book, flipping through the pages until I reached yesterday's date when we had signed in for the climb. My heart nearly stopped. The page was completely scribbled over, a tangled mess of black lines covering our information. It was impossible to read anything that might have been written there before. "Mike!" I shouted, my voice breaking. He ran to me, looking over my shoulder at the book. "What the hell?" he muttered, his voice trailing off. I frantically flipped through the following pages. No other entries in the last 3 days. Just our information, now illegible under that demonic scribbling. I closed the book with a sense of nausea washing over me. Mike's words echoed in my mind. "Tomorrow we'll be back to civilization with another hiking story to tell." Well, we certainly had a story. A disturbing hiking tale that no one would believe. We ran back to the car, starting the engine even before we'd closed the doors completely. As we drove away from Mount Granite, I couldn't help but keep looking at the rearview mirror, half expecting to see some sinister figure emerging from the forest. That night, lying in my safe bed, I couldn't sleep. Images of the trail, my name in the snow, and the defaced logbook danced in my mind, a whirlwind of fear and confusion. One thing I knew for sure, that had been my last hike on Mount Granite. Some places I realized hold secrets better left unrevealed. Even now, months later, I can't explain what happened on that mountain. But one thing is certain, there are genuine scary hiking stories out there. Chilling hiking experiences that defy logic and reason. And mine, well, it became just one more among the many spine-chilling outdoor tales circulating among hikers. A reminder that we are not always alone on the trails, even when we think we are. I could never have imagined that a simple canoe expedition would turn into one of the most terrifying experiences of my life. My name is Zephyr, and along with my friends, Sage and Leander, we decided to spend our summer vacation exploring the famous Boundary Waters. Young and adventurous, we were completely oblivious to the horrors that awaited us in the seemingly serene waters. Our journey started idyllically. The first days were filled with laughter, stories shared around the campfire, and the serene beauty of untouched nature. The crystal-clear waters reflected the blue sky like a perfect mirror, and the pure forest air invigorated us with every breath. It all felt like a dream amidst the wilderness. On the third day, we spotted a small solitary island on the horizon. "What if we camp there tonight?" suggested Sage, her eyes sparkling with curiosity and excitement. Leander and I exchanged glances and agreed, eager for a change of scenery. Little did we know that this decision would lead us to one of the scariest places we had ever encountered. As we docked our kayaks on the rocky shore of the island, a strange, indefinable sensation overcame me. The air felt denser, almost palpable, and an unnatural silence hung over the place like a suffocating mantle. "Are you guys feeling this?" I asked, hesitant, but my friends seemed oblivious to the oppressive atmosphere. Swallowing hard, we continued into the island, searching for a suitable spot to set up our camp. That's when we stumbled upon the scene that would change the course of our trip and our lives. An abandoned campsite lay before us, but it wasn't an ordinary abandonment. New equipment was scattered everywhere, as if its owners had vanished. Twigs with blackened tips from the fire were stuck in the ground, forming bizarre and unsettling patterns. "What the hell happened here?" muttered Leander, his usually confident voice now trembling with fear and confusion. The atmosphere in the abandoned campsite was oppressive. Sage, always the most curious among us, was the first to approach the scattered objects. "Look at this," she called out, crouching near the remains of an extinguished campfire. In its center, a charred toothbrush lay among cold ashes, along with the burnt remains of a wallet, melted glasses, and charred pieces of paper. "This is too bizarre," I murmured, a chill running down my spine. The scary stories we used to tell around the campfire now seemed childish compared to the sinister reality surrounding us. Leander, usually the skeptic of the group, was visibly disturbed. "Maybe we should leave," he suggested, his voice betraying unusual nervousness. As we debated our next move, Sage shouted, drawing our attention to the edge of the clearing. There, partially hidden among the trees, was a makeshift altar. A deer skull, its empty eye sockets staring at us accusingly, rested on a pile of stones. Surrounding it was a perfect circle of charred twigs. "This isn't natural," murmured Leander, voicing what we were all thinking. The scene before us seemed straight out of a paranormal tale, the kind you read online and dismiss as fiction. But there we were, living our own chilling story. The sun began to set, painting the sky with hues of orange and red that now seemed menacing. The impending darkness amplified our anxiety. "We can't stay here," I decided, feeling the weight of responsibility for our group. "Let's paddle as far as we can before it gets completely dark," Sage and Leander readily agreed, and within minutes we were back in our canoes, paddling frantically away from that cursed island. We paddled with all our might, our tired arms driven by the terror that now consumed us. The dark waters of the lake reflected the twilight sky like a sinister mirror. The silence was broken only by the rhythmic sound of our paddles cutting through the surface, and our labored breathing. None of us dared to look back, fearing to see something or someone following us. "There," Sage pointed to a small cove on the opposite shore of the lake. "We can camp there." We silently agreed, too exhausted to argue. Upon reaching the shore, we set up our camp with efficiency born of fear and fatigue. The shadows of the forest seemed to lengthen, menacing, as we struggled to light a campfire. Sitting around the flickering flames, we tried to process the day's events. "What do you think happened on that island?" Leander asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Sage hugged her knees, her eyes reflecting the fire's glow. "Maybe it was some kind of ritual," she suggested hesitantly. I remained silent, my mind replaying the disturbing images we had witnessed. The scary stories we used to share now seemed like a foreboding omen. Every noise from the forest made us jump, imagining horrors lurking in the shadows. As the night progressed, the tension among us grew. We took turns sleeping, always one of us keeping watch. My turn was the last, and as I watched the sky lighten, I heard a distant sound that made my blood run cold. It was a low, guttural chanting coming from the direction of the cursed island. "Wake up," I whispered urgently, shaking Sage and Leander. "We have to go. Now." Without question, they rose, and within minutes we were back in our canoes. As we paddled away, the chanting grew louder, echoing across the waters. I looked back, and for a moment, thought I saw a solitary figure on the shore of the distant island, watching us. The sunrise found us paddling frantically, our physical exhaustion surpassed only by the terror that propelled us forward. The once inviting waters now seemed to hide sinister secrets. Sage kept a vigilant eye on our rear, while Leander and I took turns leading, guiding us back to civilization. "Look," exclaimed Leander after hours of silent paddling. In the distance, we spotted the outlines of the marina where we had started our journey. The sight of civilization had never felt so comforting. Mustering our last reserves of strength, we sped towards safety. Upon reaching the marina, we were greeted by curious stares from the staff and other campers. We must have looked like a sorry trio, pale, exhausted, and visibly shaken. The marina manager, a burly man named Hank, approached us with concern. "You guys all right? You look like you've seen a ghost." We exchanged hesitant glances before Sage took the initiative. With a trembling voice, she relayed our experience on the mysterious island. As she spoke, I noticed Hank's expression change from concern to something more. "That island," he murmured, rubbing his tired face. "It's not the first time I've heard such stories." Hank led us to his office, closing the door behind us. There have been other reports over the years. Missing campers, abandoned equipment, strange rituals, but nothing concrete. A heavy silence fell upon us. Hank's words confirmed that our experience was not unique, but it only deepened the mystery. "What do we do now?" I asked, feeling the weight of responsibility. "You did the right thing by leaving," Hank replied, his gaze grave. Some areas of the wilderness hold secrets that are perhaps best left undisturbed." He paused, pondering his next words. "My advice? Share your story, but be prepared for skepticism. Not everyone is ready to accept that there are more mysteries in these waters than we can comprehend." We left the marina that day with more questions than answers. Our adventure, which had started as a simple canoe trip, had turned into one of the most spine-chilling experiences we could have imagined. As we drove back home, each lost in our own thoughts, one thing was certain: the Boundary Waters held deep and disturbing secrets, and we had only scratched the surface of its mysteries. As an avid adventurer, I've always sought unique experiences on my hikes, but nothing could have prepared me for the truly scary stories that unfolded in the White Mountain National Forest. My name is Ethan, and this is a story that still makes my heart race. One of the most disturbing I've ever encountered. It was a late spring day when I decided to explore a little-known trail. The air was humid and heavy, laden with the scent of blooming vegetation. As I ventured deeper into the trail, I noticed the oppressive silence that enveloped the forest. It was as if nature itself was holding its breath, anticipating the horrors that were about to unfold. As the day progressed, a sense of discomfort began to grow in my stomach. The shadows seemed to move strangely, as if they had a life of their own, and the occasional breeze brought indecipherable whispers. I tried to shake off these impressions, attributing them to fatigue and the solitude of the hike. With twilight approaching, I chose a seemingly peaceful spot to set up camp. As I prepared my campfire, I noticed something disturbing about the surrounding trees. Strange marks, almost like scars, formed bizarre patterns on their trunks. They seemed ancient, but definitely not natural. A chill ran down my spine as I tried to find a rational explanation for those enigmatic symbols. The darkness fell like a heavy mantle over the forest, bringing with it a chill that seemed to penetrate to my very soul. I curled up in my sleeping bag, but sleep eluded me. The nighttime sounds of the forest seemed amplified and distorted. The rustling of leaves sounded like urgent whispers, the cracking of branches like stealthy footsteps. And then I noticed something more, a subtle, almost subliminal sound that I couldn't quite identify. It was like a constant vibration, barely perceptible, yet undeniably present. I closed my eyes tightly, trying to block out that disturbing symphony, but the sound seemed to grow in intensity, as if it was getting closer. Restless and disturbed by the strange sounds of the forest, I decided to get out of my sleeping bag to stretch my legs. The full moon bathed the clearing with a pale, ghostly light, casting distorted shadows that seemed to dance around me. It was then that I had one of the most spine-chilling experiences I would never forget. As I walked a little away from the campsite to answer nature's call, the vibration I had noticed earlier seemed to increase. Suddenly, my foot hit something metallic. I looked down and, in the moonlight, I saw a shiny object partially buried in the damp earth. With a racing heart, I crouched down to examine it. It was a tuning fork, its unmistakable U-shape even in the dim light. Confused, I looked around and noticed more similar objects forming a perfect circle. In the center of the circle, engraved on the ground, was a strange symbol that made me instinctively recoil. It was as if I had stumbled upon a scene straight out of one of the scary stories we used to share around the campfire. My mind raced, trying to find a rational explanation for that bizarre discovery. Were these the remains of some abandoned scientific experiment, or something more sinister? The ghost stories I had always considered mere urban legends suddenly seemed terribly plausible. The vibration in the air seemed to emanate from that circle, pulsing like a hidden heart of the forest. Driven by a mix of fascination and terror, I decided to take one of the tuning forks with me. As soon as I touched it, an electric current ran through my body. The buzzing that had been almost imperceptible before now resonated in my ears, as if I had awakened something dormant. With trembling hands, I put the tuning fork in my pocket and ran back to my campsite, feeling as if 1,000 invisible eyes were watching me. Back at camp, my mind was racing with theories about the strange circle I had discovered. The tuning fork in my pocket seemed to pulse, as if it had a life of its own. Unable to sleep, I stayed awake all night, watching the shadows dance at the edge of the clearing. The constant buzzing had turned into a dissonant, almost hypnotic melody. It was as if the forest was singing an ancient, forgotten song, filled with dark secrets. With the first ray of sunlight, I decided to leave. As I broke camp, I noticed that the marks on the trees looked different in the daylight. They formed complex patterns that reminded me of constellations. I tried to photograph them, but my camera inexplicably malfunctioned near them. As I resumed the trail, I realized something had changed. The forest, once silent, now seemed to vibrate with a strange energy. The birds sang in discordant tones, and even the wind carried fragments of inaudible whispers. It was as if I had stepped into an alternate world, a setting worthy of the most disturbing stories. As I made my way down the trail, I encountered other hikers. To my surprise, they seemed unaware of anything unusual. We chatted briefly, and when I mentioned the circle of tuning forks, their eyes became vacant, as if they couldn't process the information. I realized then that I was alone in my perception of this altered world, which made the experience even more terrifying. As I neared the end of the trail, the sense of being in an altered world intensified. The tuning fork in my pocket vibrated constantly, as if it was in tune with some invisible force of the forest. Suddenly, a thick, unnatural mist started to form around me. The sounds of the forest changed drastically. Birds' songs ceased, replaced by an oppressive silence, broken only by the increasingly loud buzzing of the tuning fork. On impulse, I took the tuning fork out of my pocket. It pulsed with a bluish light, barely perceptible. Without thinking, I struck it against a nearby rock. The sound that emanated was deafening, reverberating through the forest like a primal scream. At that very moment, I felt as if something invisible had been released or perhaps imprisoned. The mist dissipated as quickly as it had formed. The normal sounds of the forest gradually returned. The tuning fork in my hand was now cold and silent, like an ordinary object. I looked around, trying to make sense of what had just happened, but the forest seemed to have gone back to normal, as if nothing extraordinary had occurred. I reached the end of the trail exhausted and confused. As I waited for the bus that would take me back to civilization, I tried to rationalize the events of the past few days. Were they just the delusions of a tired mind? Or had I truly witnessed something beyond human comprehension? The scary stories I knew seemed pale in comparison to what I had experienced. As I boarded the bus, I took one last look at the forest. For a moment, I thought I saw a shadowy figure among the trees, watching me. I blinked, and it was gone. I put the tuning fork in my pocket, determined to investigate its origin when I got home. As the bus pulled away, I couldn't shake the feeling that I had somehow become a part of something bigger, a story that would join the ranks of supposedly true trail horrors, waiting to be discovered by another unsuspecting adventurer. As the distance between me and the White Mountain National Forest grew, I felt a mix of relief and a strange nostalgia. I knew that this experience would forever change my perception of hiking and the world around us. The disturbing stories I used to hear with skepticism now seemed possible, even likely. Looking out the bus window, I saw my reflection, the wide eyes of someone who had glimpsed something beyond the veil of everyday reality. I knew that even if I never experienced anything like this again, the memories of those haunted days in the forest would stay with me forever. A constant reminder of the mysteries that still exist in our world, waiting to be uncovered by those brave or foolish enough to seek them out. If you enjoyed the video you just watched, you won't want to miss this next one. Click now and I'll see you there.